obviously, if there is no hierarchy, then you don't have to map it out. Right? The second thing that you want to do in your observation for a program evaluation is you want to try and identify latent tension. Right? You want to identify latent tension or conflict. Whoever's hiring you to do the program evaluation might not, the CEO, if the CEO is the person that is hiring you, might not have full awareness of the true magnitude, the true extent of the problem, right? So you can't assume in beginning your program evaluation that you have full knowledge. Actually, if you assume that from the beginning, you're probably going to fail in your program evaluation. Probably the most important piece of advice that you can get as a potential program evaluator is to assume that there is information that is willfully not being disclosed, right? Or being hidden for some reason, right? So identify latent tension, and in identifying that tension, assume that information is being left out, right? Assume that information is being left out. In this example, all that I might know as the program evaluator is that for the last 3 quarters, there's been a decrease in sales. If I investigate a little bit further, then I can identify, after identifying the hierarchy, that is tension between the sales force and the engineers. If I investigate a little bit further, I might find out that there's a bit of animosity between the engineers and the salespeople for the reasons that I said before. The animosity is something that will not be discussed at the beginning of the program evaluation. You won't get to issues of animosity and grievances until much, much later in your program evaluation. So you should assume that that information being animosity and grievances, for example, is not going to be disclosed. Okay. And then the last to recognize, and there's a lot more that goes in observation, but this is just sort of a quick assessment of this. The last thing to recognize in observation is that once I've created the hierarchy, once I assume that everything's not going to be disclosed, I have to make sure from my initial observation, my initial sort of gut check feeling, that I use my initial feelings to help determine my eventual outcomes. I know that sounds like a mouthful. Here's what I mean. If you get into a very technical program evaluation, an evaluation that might last as long as, let's say, 3 or 4 months, right? 2, 3, 4 weeks in, 8 weeks in, you might not have the same interpretation of the company as you originally had, right? So when confronted with all the information that you're given from the beginning of the program, the beginning of your program evaluation, your initial observation, you want to make sure that you write suggested outcomes from the beginning, right? So you should write suggested outcomes from the beginning of your evaluation. Once you feel within the first day or 2, maybe 3 days, that you have a very general sense of what the tension is, what the problem is, what might be contributing to sort of the decrease in sales or whatever it is that you're evaluating, right? You know that you're not going to be able to identify deeper issues of grievances and complaints and tensions. You know that's going to take a lot longer to get at that. But at that initial phase, right, that first few days, you want to write down what you think possible outcomes might be. I think to solve this problem, the company should do X, Y, Z. You want to hold on to that information, and then after you've done your program of evaluation, compare your final outcome assessment against your original outcome assessment. That might be a bit much, and hopefully by the end of the video, you'll understand what that meant, what I just said. But what it is, it's, for example, perfect example, if you're in education, let's say English, and you're doing SAT vocabulary prep for your students. You might give a vocabulary prep exam the first day of class. Students don't know what is going to happen throughout the semester. This is day one and they're getting a test and it's asking them like 40 words. I don't know what the definition of these terms are, or maybe I know a few of them. So they try to define it as best as they can. You take that pretest and you hold it, and you give that test again, the exact same test, at the end of the semester, and obviously you've taught the students what those words are, they've had drills, they've gone over definitions, they've used it in sentences, they've spoken those words. And what 99% of the time should happen if you're teaching effectively is that the post-test should always be scored higher than the pre-test, right? Because there's a distinct difference, right? And that difference was your educational expertise, right? Contributed to them doing better. Well, similarly, in your observation, if within the first few days, maybe even the first few hours of understanding what the dynamics are within the program that you're evaluating, you write down what you think the outcome should be, then you go through the full evaluation process and you check, and then you write down the actual outcome. What you can do is, in comparing the original assessment and the original outcome against the final outcome, you'll be able to see what changes you had, and also report these changes to those who are hiring you, and it will further sharpen your recommendation, right? So it's important to understand, and there's a lot more that can be discussed in just basic observation, but you know, YouTube only gives you so much time, and I don't want this to be a 25-part video. But the first thing that I wanted to discuss was observation. Is there a hierarchy? If so, map it out. Identify latent issues. That'll take time. See where the tensions are, see where the grievances are. And then lastly, any ideas that you have for possible outcomes, don't wait until the end to start doing outcomes. You should be thinking outcomes from the second you begin the program evaluation. What is it that I think can happen from day one to make this program, to make this system, to make this structure better, without having to wait until I'm confronted with the problems, because then it really is too late, right? And that's what makes the difference between very, very effective program evaluators and sort of second-tier program evaluators, is I would argue second-tier program evaluators become consumed by the evaluation and lose track of the outcome, right? Which is important. Okay, so we've discussed observation.